I've been playing Star Wars Outlaws non-stop since it released earlier this week, and I've learned a lot of things that the game doesn't do a great job of telling you. Here are 15 tips and tricks to help you make the most of your time with Star Wars Outlaws. I've broken these up into two sections, gameplay and progression. Plus, I've added in 3 bonus tips for quality of life features that I had no idea about, so stick around for those. Let's get into it. So the first few tips are all stealth related because there is a pretty strong focus on stealth in this game, and I actually think there's quite a few misconceptions going around about how stealth works. So first off, tip number 1, there is always a stealthy way in to wherever you're trying to go, whether that's a vent or crack to sneak through, a grapple point, or a wall climb. That might seem obvious, and the game does tell you that when you first start playing, but just make sure to keep your eyes peeled and know that you don't have to take out the guards at the front of most locations or grind rep to be allowed in if you don't want to, which means that you'll need to be quiet inside, and that leads to the next few tips. There is a whistle you can use to bring enemies closer. It's your speed or recall button, which should be right on the D-pad on Xbox. Use this to lure an enemy to your hiding place, wait for the button prompt, and you'll automatically pull them behind whatever you're hiding behind. So this can be a little finicky, just fair warning. The whistle always works, but pulling enemies behind wherever you're hiding, you have to wait for the button prompt, and sometimes I have been caught by other enemies further away, so your mileage might vary here, but it does work for the most part. But if that's not flashy enough for you and you want a cooler way to take down enemies, tip number 3 is you can take down enemies from above. So the game doesn't show you this until like very far on in the main quest on the second planet, but you can actually do takedowns from above in this game. So anytime you're at a higher vantage than your enemies, the button prompt should show up for a takedown, and you can jump and then press that button and take them out. This is a cool cinematic way to take out enemies, obviously, and when you nail it, it feels great, but just be aware of your surroundings that no other enemies can see you. But that actually leads me to tip number 4. You don't have to worry about every single person in all of the faction compounds. As you navigate faction territories, you might be worried about anyone seeing you. But the reality is, you only have to worry about the guards. Those are the ones in outfits holding the guns. They look like the traditional faction people. Shopkeepers and other civilian types won't react to you in these territories, so you're safe to walk around without fear of sounding an alarm or getting caught. But if you do have to go guns blazing, the next few tips cover how to prepare like a master outlaw. So this is where I want to introduce a couple of tactics to help you through instant fail stealth sections where if the alarm goes off, you immediately fail the mission. There are ways to work around this, and you can still go guns blazing if you really want to. So first things first with tip number 5. If you think you might have to go loud in an area where the alarms mean instant fail, make sure to obviously disable all alarm panels first. You can do that by shooting the alarms with the ion module on your blaster, which you should unlock pretty early in the game. You can also use Nix to disable them from range, or you can run up and interact with them yourself and turn them off that way. There's also a couple other ways to handle them that are sort of spoilery because they're related to skills you unlock later, so I'll leave that for you to figure out. Once all alarm panels are disabled, regular troopers can't sound alarms anymore, but that does still leave the pesky officers. So tip number 6 is to deal with the officers first. Officers have personal comms devices that allow them to send alarms without the need for alarm panels. So even though you've done all that work to disable the alarm panels, officers can override that. This obviously means that officers have to be prioritized being handled with. But before you start shooting and taking care of the officers first, keep in mind that you don't actually have to take them out to deal with them. You can use Nix to steal from them and take their personal comms. Once all of the officers in the room no longer have their personal comms, no one can use the alarms anymore, which is a pretty cool way to nullify that in instant fail stealth sections. And now you're just about ready to go loud if you really want to, but there's one final thing we need to take care of. Tip number 7 is about security cameras, which can be a real pain. While you can use Nix to distract them, this becomes difficult to manage on the fly, and there's a much easier way to deal with them. Simply use the ion module, your handy dandy upgrade for your blaster, to take out the cameras permanently. Just make sure enemies aren't too close to hear the blaster fire, or that could cause some problems for you. And if you've managed to somehow stay hidden through all of these tips, then I have one final traversal tip for you in the stealth sections. Like in most Ubisoft games, there's a crouch button to allow you to move around a little more stealthily, but what I didn't know is if you double tap crouch, you do like a tactical roll, and that sends K into a roll, obviously, that is essential for navigating stealth sections quickly and quietly. It's honestly surprising that this isn't mentioned in the game anywhere. I know that a lot of like the Assassin's Creed games have that roll mechanic where you double tap crouch in them already, so maybe they just assumed you would know that, but I didn't know that off the hop. But not only for stealth, assuming you want to go loud, the roll is a great way to get better positioning when you're getting shot at. So if you're like getting blasted by like 4 troopers at the same time, you can do a quick roll behind some new cover, and now you're good to go again. So that gives you a nice little overview of how to go loud, but you might be wondering, once the dust is settled, how do you bring down that heat? So across the open worlds, you'll see these rectangular buildings, usually guarded by a few stormtroopers. They're also like the gear icon on the open world map that looks like the Empire symbol. These are Imperial terminals, and you can break into these to lower your wanted level and make a ton of credits. It's a great kill two birds with one stone thing, if you're interested. And by the way, if you're having trouble getting into those Imperial terminals for whatever reason, you can also go to most of the major cities to find a corrupt Empire officer, and you can pay them to clear your wanted level as well. So you do have options there. Now that you're free of the heat, it's time to look stylish while you're cruising the galaxy. So tip number 10 is about transmog in Star Wars Outlaws, and you might be wondering, is there a transmog system in Outlaws? And the answer is, heck yeah. It's kind of just there, it's not super obvious, but it's available almost immediately as soon as you start unlocking gear. Go to your inventory, select the slot you want to transmog, and press Y. This will bring up all the gear you've unlocked for that slot and allow you to choose any of those gear pieces to be the cosmetic variant that Kay is currently wearing. And yes, that preserves all the stats on whatever the core piece is, so you can look how you want and still take advantage of all the perks you have equipped. And it's great to look good while traveling, but what about actually getting around the galaxy? Being completely honest with you, tip number 11 is a bit embarrassing. I didn't know how to go from Tashara orbit to other planets, and I don't remember the game ever mentioning the button press, but if you're traveling in your ship, when you look in the bottom left of the screen, there is a button prompt there that if you press right on the D-pad, it brings up this orbit menu that allows you to move between planets. You do have to repair your hyperdrive in the main quest first, but once that's done, you can go to any of the planets you want whenever you want. Once you've chosen where you want to go, make sure you're aiming into empty space, otherwise the hyperdrive won't work, so just aim towards the vast emptiness of space and you should be good to go. I also want to call out one of my favorite things about this game, even after all the time I've played it, it never gets old, is when the hyperdrive's ready to go and you can punch it. Oh man. Punch it. Punch it a lot. That's another tip. Bonus one for you. And speaking of all this punching it, tip number 12 is all about exploration. I'm certainly not telling you how you should play, but my recommendation here is that you get off Tashara as soon as possible. The main quests there are great. There's a lot to distract you there as far as side content, grinding contracts with the faction reps, things like that. But I found the game really started to open up more once you were juggling a few planets, and I think that helped eliminate burnout for me. I don't know if you've played Dragon Age Inquisition, but one of the challenges I had with that game was I spent so long in the first quest region that I got super burned out on the game, even though I thought it was excellent. I feel like that could happen here too, because there really is so much to pull your focus, but then the game feels much more limited, like you're only playing on one planet. So I really recommend opening up a second planet, or third, however many you want, as soon as possible, just to open up the game a bit. But obviously, play however you want. If you're loving Tashara, keep going. I love you. And speaking of exploring, make sure to talk to every person you can, everywhere you go. This might seem obvious, but the reason I'm calling this out is a lot of people in the game have this very inconspicuous white circle by them, and that's the only indication that you can talk to them. And you might think when you go to like main cities, a lot of those are just pointless little side conversations. They are not. They are often intel or quests or something valuable to unlock more for the game. I love the immersiveness of this. There aren't just huge quest markers everywhere, but it can be very easy to miss, so just keep your eyes peeled. And specifically make sure to keep your eyes open for opportunities to boost faction reps, because it's all about who you know in this game. So tip number 14 is to level at least one faction to max early for early benefits to gameplay. Now, take this one with a grain of salt, but I do recommend leveling one first, and the reason is kind of threefold. Number one, it makes it a little bit easier with that faction when you have to go into their territories across all the planets, because now you're friendly and they'll let you into most areas, though there still are areas you're going to have to sneak around no matter what. Number two is a little bit less obvious, but by maxing the faction rep for one faction, you're probably causing problems with other ones. And there's a good chance by doing this, you might push your rep for another faction into like the hated realm, where they actually send kill squads after you. For me, this is a cool way to just diversify the experience of the game. If you grind too many factions at once, you'll get them all into like decent shape, and then everything will just be like running to one place, doing something, and then leaving. I think interestingly, by pushing your max rep with one faction, you make the game easier for them, but harder for others, and that just creates more variety. And then obviously the third reason I'm recommending this is you immediately get some great goodies from maxing the rep of one faction, and it's a good way to just get comfortable with the system without like breaking it really early on in the game by maxing everything all at once. Like I said, it's all about who you know in this game. Faction reps are important. You don't just have to depend on Nyx. But if you are depending on Nyx and he's letting you down, then tip number 15 is to make sure to stop at every food stall for a quick mini game. It's like a quick time event where you press a few buttons and you eat some food. It's actually super cute too, watching Nyx eat food, so it's kind of a fun diversion. But at the end of that, you unlock a new Nyx treasure that you can equip to Nyx and change the way he performs in combat and exploration. There's some pretty cool modifiers for Nyx that you can unlock in this game, so just keep an eye out for them. They're mostly in the main cities in the game, and they can really help you out. If you don't like the quick time event here, you can actually turn that off in the settings, so this can just be like a cutscene and then a reward if you want to as well. So moving on to the bonus section here with 3 quality of life features. These are all kind of rapid fire, so we'll start with bonus tip number 1. So the game started me at least in cinematic camera mode, which definitely has a cool vibe, but for a game that has such beautiful, detailed environments, you're effectively cutting off half the screen, so I just don't think it's worth the trade-off. You can turn this off in the settings if you want, and I think it just immediately improves immersion and just enjoyment of the overall world. But also, no judgment if you want to keep cinematic camera mode. I'm sure there's some people that appreciate that, and that's great. Bonus tip number 2. I'm not usually a fan of yellow paint marking your way in a game, but in Outlaws it kind of works. There's these little signs that have yellow arrows on them, and they point in the relative direction of where you're trying to go. For the most part, you're probably not going to need these at all, but every once in a while, I did get a little turned around and wasn't sure where to go next, and that arrow is really great at just allowing you to know where to go. Bonus tip number 3 is about the lockpicking minigame. So I actually really like this. It kind of reminds me of the Starfield minigame for lockpicking. Not that they're at all the same in how you play them, but they just both feel kind of engaging and fun. But if you don't like the lockpicking game here, no sweat. You can turn it off in the settings. I mentioned earlier that you can also turn off the QuickTime event for the Nick's food stalls. And just keep in mind, there's a lot of stuff you can turn off and on in this game, so go into the settings, figure out what you like and don't like, and there's probably stuff you can turn off to just, in general, make the game a lot better. But that's just how to make the game play better if you're already playing Star Wars Outlaws. If you're still on the fence about the game, click this video right here where I cover my first impressions and all the reasons I think Star Wars Outlaws isn't just another Ubisoft open world. I'll see you there in a couple seconds. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Dylan. This is Beep Boop Loot. We'll see you in the next one.